The great station floated in the darkness of space like a metal mountain among the stars, and inside its massive halls, the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy had gathered to decide the fate of a young world. Called Earth High Arbiter Valtorak stood at the center of the council chamber, his tall gray body casting a long shadow across the polished floor as the lights above made his silver robes shine like liquid metal. Fellow council members, he announced in a voice that echoed through the vast room. Today we finally address the human problem that has troubled us for 3 decades. The ambassadors from 11 other species nodded their heads and made sounds of agreement, their various forms shifting in their seats as they listened to the High Arbiter speak. Ambassador Krikstal of the Malvani Federation clicked his mandibles together in approval, his insect-like eyes reflecting the blue lights of the chamber as he leaned forward with interest. These humans have grown too bold, Valtorak continued, raising his four-fingered hand toward a holographic display that showed a small blue planet spinning slowly in the void. They refuse to accept their proper place as a client species under our protection and guidance. The display shifted to show human ships traveling between worlds, building stations, and establishing colonies on distant planets at a speed that made several council members gasp in shock. In just 30 years, they have spread across 40 star systems, the High Arbiter said, with disgust dripping from every word. They breed like insects and build like machines possessed by madness. Ambassador Thelvos of the Crethony Collective, a being made of shifting purple algae contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with agitation as she spoke. What concerns me most is their technology, she said in a voice like wind chimes in a storm. They take our gifts and improve upon them in ways we never imagined possible. Exactly, Valtorak exclaimed, slamming his hand on the podium before him. They were supposed to be grateful for our knowledge and remain dependent on our wisdom. But instead, they twist everything we share into something new and strange. The Council had ruled this galaxy for over 50,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever risen so quickly or refused so stubbornly to accept the natural order of things. Young species were supposed to spend millennia learning from their elders before they could even dream of independence. But humanity had looked at those rules and simply ignored them. Ambassador Gornax of the Volanthi Empire, a massive creature covered in thick green scales, rumbled his displeasure from the far end of the chamber. My warriors have reported that humans ask questions constantly. He growled through teeth the size of daggers. They want to know why things work the way they do, and they are never satisfied with the answers we give them, because they do not respect tradition. Valtorak replied with a cold smile spreading across his thin gray face. But today, we will teach them the price of their arrogance. He pressed a button on his podium, and the holographic display changed to show a document, written in the common trade language that all species used. I propose we send humanity an ultimatum, he declared as the words floated in the air for all to see. They will surrender all military vessels within one rotation of their homeworld. The council members murmured with excitement as they read the demands appearing before them one by one. They will dismantle all colonies outside their home system and return to Earth like the children they are. More sounds of approval filled the chamber as ambassadors shifted eagerly in their seats. And finally, Valtorak said with satisfaction thick in his voice, they will submit to genetic modification that will temper their aggression and make them proper members of galactic civilization. Ambassador Rixal of the Sithini, a creature with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed like twin suns, raised her slender arm to speak. What if they refuse? She asked in a musical voice that seemed to hang in the air like perfume. Humans are known for their stubborn nature and their foolish pride. The High Arbiter laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking on a frozen lake in the dead of winter. Then, We will show them what it means to stand against the combined might of 12 ancient civilizations," he answered without a trace of doubt in his words. "Our fleets could reduce their little planet to ash in a matter of hours." "But surely that would be excessive," Ambassador Thelva said with concern coloring her energy from a deeper shade of purple. "Perhaps we should give them time to consider their situation. We will give them one full rotation of their homeworld to respond," Voltorak conceded with a wave of his hand. 23 of their hours should be more than enough time for them to realize they have no choice but to submit. The vote was called, and all 12 species raised their support for the ultimatum, their various appendages and energy signatures indicating unanimous agreement to a transmission beam locked onto Earth. And the message was sent screaming across the stars at speeds that bent the very fabric of space and time. "It is done," the High Arbiter announced with pride swelling in his chest. "By this time tomorrow, humanity will kneel before us or they will cease to exist." The council chamber erupted in celebration as ambassadors congratulated each other on their wisdom and strength, certain that they had finally solved the problem that had annoyed them for so long. Servants brought drinks and delicacies from across the galaxy as the 12 species toasted to their own greatness and the coming submission of the troublesome humans. "They are so young," Ambassador Crickstall chittered as he raised a glass of fermented nectar to his mandibles. "They have no idea what forces they face. And they are alone," Ambassador Gornax added with a booming laugh that shook the glasses on nearby tables. "No allies, no friends, no one to stand beside them against our might." High Arbiter Veltarek smiled as he watched his colleagues celebrate, completely certain that humanity would fall into line like every other young species before them. He had studied humans for years and believed he understood them completely, seeing them as nothing more than clever animals who had stumbled upon technology they did not deserve. What he did not know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that they had just made the worst mistake in the history of the Galactic Council. They had given humanity a deadline, and somewhere in the darkness of space, that deadline had just become a countdown to something the galaxy had never seen before. The celebration continued late into the night cycle, filled with laughter and dreams of conquest, while far away on a small blue planet, very different preparations were already beginning. Deep beneath the streets of Geneva, in a bunker that did not appear on any map, General Yuki Tanaka stood before a wall of screens showing the alien transmission that had just arrived from the stars. Faye showed no emotion as she watched the High Arbiter deliver his threats, her dark eyes taking in every word and gesture with the calm focus of a predator watching prey that did not yet know it was being hunted around. There stood military leaders from every nation on Earth, men and women who had spent their entire careers preparing for this exact moment without ever knowing if it would truly come. Admiral James Chun of the Pacific Fleet broke the silence first, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "They want our answer in 23 hours, he said while looking at the frozen image of Veltorek on the main screen. "That gives us time to mobilize our public defenses and perhaps negotiate for better terms." General Tanaka turned to face him, and something in her expression made the Admiral stop speaking immediately. 23 hours is far more time than we need," she replied in a voice as steady as mountain stone. "We will not be negotiating anything with anyone." The room fell silent as every officer present tried to understand what she could possibly mean by such a statement. Director Elena Vasquez of Global Intelligence stepped forward with confusion written across her face and questions burning in her eyes. "General, with respect, our public fleet consists of 37 combat vessels and 200 defense platforms," she said while gesturing at tactical displays showing Earth's known military strength. "The Council commands over 10,000 warships and weapons that could crack our planet like an egg. That is exactly what they believe, General Tanaka answered with the smallest hint of a smile touching the corner of her lips. And that belief is about to become their greatest weakness. She walked to a secure terminal and pressed her palm against a scanner that glowed red, then blue, then a color that none of the officers had ever seen before. What I am about to show you is classified beyond any level you have ever encountered, she announced as new. Displays began appearing on every screen in the room. This is the contingency, and it has been waiting for this day since humanity first made contact with alien life. The officers gasped as images filled the screens showing massive installations, hidden throughout the solar system in places no one had ever thought to look weapons. Platforms disguised as asteroids floated silently in the belt between Mars and Jupiter, their surfaces covered with dust and debris that made them invisible to any scanner. Shipyards existed in dimensions that Council scientists had declared theoretically impossible, folded into pockets of space that bent the laws of physics in ways the ancient species could not comprehend. For 30 years, we have played the part of the foolish young species, General Tanaka explained as she walked among the stunned officers. We asked stupid questions and pretended to struggle with technology they gave us like gifts to children. Admiral Chung stared at a display showing a fleet of ships unlike anything he had ever imagined, their designs sharp and dark and terrible in their beauty. How is this possible? He whispered with awe and fear mixing together in his voice. How could we hide all of this from species that have watched the stars for 50,000 years? Because they stopped looking for threats long ago, the general replied with something like pity in her words. They became so certain of their own superiority that they forgot what it means to be hungry and afraid and desperate to survive. She pulled up another display showing small devices scattered across the galaxy like seeds thrown by an invisible hand. Every diplomatic mission, every trade ship, every human who traveled beyond our borders carried pieces of our preparation with them. She continued while points of light appeared on a galactic map. We have been planting weapons and sensors and communication nodes throughout Council space for 3 decades. Director Vasquez looked like she might faint as the scale of what she was seeing finally became clear in her mind. The Council species never noticed? She asked in a voice barely louder than a breath. Not a single one of them detected what we were doing? They saw what they expected to see, General Tanaka answered with steel entering her tone. Primitive humans fumbling with technology they barely understood, grateful for scraps from the tables of their betters. She turned to face the assembly with fire burning in her eyes, an absolute certainty radiating from every word she spoke. We let them believe that lie because we knew this day would come eventually, and we wanted to be ready when it did. The room remained silent as each officer processed the truth that had been hidden from them and everyone else on Earth for their entire lives. The Council gave us an ultimatum, General Tanaka declared while straightening her uniform and squaring her shoulders. They expect us to cower and beg for mercy like frightened animals. She walked to a communication console and entered a code that had never been used before in the history of human civilization. Instead, we will give them a response they will never forget. Her fingers moved across the controls as she prepared to send a message to installations across the solar system and beyond, all contingency forces. This is General Yuki Tanaka speaking with full authority of the United Terran Defense Council. She announced in a voice that would echo through history. Prometheus is unbound. I repeat, Prometheus is unbound. Across human space, men and women who had trained in secret their entire lives received the signal they had been waiting for since the day they first put on their uniforms. Pilots ran to ships that officially did not exist, while engineers powered up systems that broke every rule the Council had ever written about what technology could and could not, doing hidden bases on every continent. Soldiers gathered their weapons and prepared to face enemies who thought themselves invincible masters of creation. "How long until we can strike?" Admiral Chun asked with a new understanding of his role dawning in his eyes. General Tanaka checked her displays and nodded with satisfaction at the numbers appearing before her. 17 minutes from now. The Galactic Council will learn what happens when you threaten humanity, she answered while watching her forces move into position across the stars. And they will spend the rest of their existence wishing they had never heard of our little blue planet. The countdown began, and somewhere in the darkness between worlds, humanity prepared to announce its presence to the galaxy in a way that no species would ever forget. The Citadel on Accord had floated in its impossible location for over 40,000 years, protected by the gravitational dance of 3 black holes that made approach by conventional means absolutely impossible. Only the Council knew the precise calculations needed to navigate the jump gates that provided safe passage to this fortress of galactic power, or so they believed, with the certainty that comes from millennia of unchallenged rule over the stars. High Arbiter Valtorek was enjoying his 3rd glass of ceremonial wine when the first alarm began screaming through the station like a wounded animal crying out in terror. "What is happening?" he demanded while purple liquid spilled across his silver robes as he jumped from his seat in surprise. A young Scythony officer ran into the celebration chamber with fear etched across every line of his obsidian face. "High Arbiter, we are detecting multiple signatures inside our shield perimeter," he shouted while his hands trembled against the data tablet he carried. "They did not come through the jump gates." "That is impossible," Ambassador Crickstel chittered as he pushed his way toward the nearest viewing port with his compound eyes wide with disbelief. "Nothing can exist inside our shields without passing through the gates first." But when he pressed his face against the transparent material and looked out into the void, his mandibles fell open and a silent scream of horror ships were appearing from nothing, emerging from folds in space itself like predators rising from dark water to claim their prey. They were black as the void between galaxies, shaped in angles that seemed to hurt the eye, and they moved with a grace that spoke of terrible purpose. "Those are human vessels," Ambassador Thelvos screamed as her energy form flickered with patterns of pure panic. "The humans are inside our defenses." Valtorak grabbed the communication console with shaking hands and tried to connect with the station's defense command. "All weapons platforms, open fire immediately," he ordered in a voice that cracked with the first traces of real fear he had felt in centuries. "Destroy those ships before they can attack." But the weapons did not respond, and when he looked at his tactical display, he saw that every human vessel had already positioned itself at a critical junction of the station's systems. "They knew exactly where to appear," whispered Ambassador Rixel as she watched more and more ships materialize with impossible precision. "They have been studying us all along." The human fleet now numbered over 300 vessels, each one holding position like a predator waiting for the signal to strike for 17 heartbeats. Nothing moved as the Council stared at their executioners and wondered what death would feel like then. The broadcast began. It was not words or images, but something far worse. A frequency that seemed to reach directly into the minds of every alien on the station master Gornax. The massive warrior who had boasted of his species' strength just hours ago fell to his knees as something ancient and terrible clawed at his consciousness. "What are they doing to us?" he roared while tears streamed down his scaled face and his mighty hands clutched at his head in agony. Every Council member experienced the same sensation, a primal terror that reached past their civilized minds to touch the frightened animals that still lived deep within their genetic memory. This was the fear of prey recognizing the predator, The sudden awful understanding that something higher on the food chain was watching them with hungry eyes. The frequency was something humanity had reverse-engineered from 3 decades of diplomatic exchanges, carefully mapping the neural patterns of every council species until they knew exactly how to make them feel. Small 17 seconds of absolute horror passed before the signal stopped, leaving the council members gasping and trembling on the floor like broken toys. Then the electromagnetic pulses hit, and every system on the station died at once. Emergency lights flickered on after an eternity of darkness, casting red shadows across faces that had aged 1,000 years in just a few minutes. They did not fire a single weapon, Ambassador Crickstyle said with wonder and terror mixing in his clicking voice. They defeated us without destroying anything. The doors to the celebration chambers slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, and figures in matte black armor stepped through like ghosts made solid flesh. Their visors showed no faces, reflected nothing, absorbed the light itself until they seemed like holes cut in reality. Remain calm and you will not be harmed, announced a voice from the lead figure in perfectly accented council standard. You are now under the protection of the United Terran Defense Force. High Arbiter Veltorak struggled to his feet with dignity he no longer felt, his robe stained with wine and his hands still shaking from the neural assault. You cannot do this, he shouted with desperation, replacing the arrogance that had defined him for centuries. The Council has ruled this galaxy for 50,000 years. The armored figure tilted its head in what might have been amusement or pity. Impossible to tell behind that featureless mask. Your rule ended 17 minutes ago, the human replied in a tone as calm as still water. Now you will wait here while your fate is decided by people who actually understand the galaxy you claim to control. More soldiers entered and efficiently separated the Council members into individual containment areas while others secured the station's critical systems. Ambassador Rixolo found herself escorted to a small chamber where a human guard stood watch over her with weapons that hummed with barely contained power. How did you do this? She asked the silent soldier while her mind still reeled from what she had experienced. How did your species accomplish something so impossible? The guard said nothing, but somewhere behind that dark visor, Rixal thought she caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like kindness in the command center of the lead human vessel. General Yuki Tanaka watched the tactical display showing green lights across every objective. All council members secured, reported her executive officer. 0 casualties on both sides, as planned. The general nodded with satisfaction and opened a channel to Earth. Phase 1 complete, she announced to the waiting world. The Citadel has fallen, and the Council is in our custody. The hardest part was over, but what came next would determine whether humanity rose as conquerors or something far more. Impressive 17 minutes had changed everything. And now the real work of building a better galaxy was about to begin. The council members sat in separate chambers scattered throughout the Citadel of Accord, each one guarded by silent human soldiers who moved with mechanical precision and showed no emotion behind their dark visors. High Arbiter Veltorak had spent the last hour trying to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong, so incredibly fast. His species had conquered star systems before humans had learned to make fire. And now he sat like a prisoner in his own seat of power. A holographic projector in the center of his chamber flickered to life, and the face of a human woman appeared before him with eyes that seemed to look straight through his soul. High Arbiter Veltorak, she said in a voice that carried authority without raising in volume. I am General Yuki Tanaka of the United Terran Defense Council, and we need to talk about the future of this galaxy. You dare to lecture me about the future? Veltorak hissed with venom dripping from every word. Your species is barely out of the caves, and you think you can dictate terms to civilizations that have existed for 50 millennia? General Tanaka's expression did not change as she listened to his outburst with the patience of someone who had all the time in the universe. You gave us 23 hours to surrender, she replied when he had finished speaking. We needed 17 minutes to capture your capital station and disable every fleet in Council space. The High Arbiter's gray face turned pale as her words registered in his mind. Every fleet? He whispered with horror, creeping into his voice like ice water filling his veins. That is not possible. The holographic display shifted to show a map of the galaxy with thousands of points marked in glowing red scattered across Council territory for 30 years. Every human ship that entered your space carried pieces of our contingency protocol, General Tanaka explained while the map zoomed in on various locations. Weapons platforms disguised as debris, communication nodes hidden in asteroids, sensor nets woven through the very fabric of space itself. Valtarak watched as tactical data scrolled across the display showing Council warships, drifting powerless around their homeworlds. We activated everything simultaneously 17 minutes after you sent your ultimatum, the general continued with something like sadness touching her voice. Your fleets never even saw the attack coming because they were looking for ships when they should have been looking for ghosts. Why are you telling me this? The High Arbiter demanded while struggling to maintain some shred of his former dignity. Are you going to execute us now and display our bodies as a warning to the galaxy? General Tanaka was quiet for a long moment before she answered. And when she spoke, her voice carried weight that pressed against Valtarak like physical force. We could destroy every council world by the end of the day, she said with simple honesty that was somehow more terrifying than any threat. Our weapons are already in position, and there is nothing your species could do to stop us. The High Arbiter found himself unable to speak as the full reality of his situation crashed over him like a wave of cold water. We have had the capability to end your civilizations for 11 years. General Tanaka continued while watching his face cycle through emotions he had not felt in centuries. We could have struck first and eliminated the threat you represented before you ever knew we were dangerous. Then why did you wait? Valtarak asked with genuine confusion, replacing his fear for just a moment. Why let us threaten you when you could have destroyed us at any time? The human woman smiled, and it was not the smile of a predator, but something far more unsettling to the ancient alien. Because destruction was never our goal, she answered with warmth, entering her voice for the first time. We did not build our contingency to conquer the galaxy, but to ensure we would never have to. The High Arbiter stared at her holographic image, with his mind struggling to process what she was saying. You showed us exactly who you were over the last 30 years. General Tanaka explained while leaning forward as if sharing a secret between old friends. Arrogant, rigid, incapable of seeing anything that did not fit your expectations of how the universe should work. We knew that eventually you would try to subjugate us like every young species before. She continued with her eyes never leaving his. And we knew that when that day came, we needed to be ready to respond in a way you could not ignore or dismiss. Valtarak felt something strange happening in his chest. Something he had not experienced in thousands of years of political maneuvering and conquest. He felt shame. What do you want from us? He asked in a voice stripped of all pretense and pride. What terms will you demand for our surrender? General Tanaka's smile grew warmer as she heard the change in his tone. The council will dissolve, she stated firmly while counting points on her fingers. Each species will govern its own affairs without interference from any central authority. Second, humanity will share the technologies we have developed with all species equally, not as gifts from masters to servants, but as knowledge exchanged between equals. Third, there will be a new agreement among the stars, one built on cooperation and mutual respect rather than domination and fear. The High Arbiter listened with his mouth hanging open as the human listed demands that were nothing like what he had expected. "You conquered us," he said with confusion thick in his voice. "You could take everything we have and reduce our worlds to ashes, yet you ask for peace?" "We do not want conquest," General Tanaka replied with steel returning to her voice. "We never wanted conquest, but we also refuse to accept subjugation." She stood straighter and looked directly into his eyes through the holographic display. "You saw us as children to be controlled and corrected when we misbehaved," she declared with pride ringing in every word. "You were wrong about what we are. We are the species that looked into the darkness between stars and saw not emptiness but opportunity," she continued while her voice rose with passion. "We are the species that refused to accept limits on what we could achieve or what we could become. We do not conquer, High Arbiter, because we know the cost of war better than any species in this galaxy," General Tanaka concluded with absolute certainty. "But we will never kneel to anyone who thinks they have the right to make us less than what we are." Valtorek bowed his head as the truth of her words settled into his ancient bones like medicine for a sickness he had not known. He carried, "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now we build something better," the human replied. "Together." 10 years had passed since the day that changed everything, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had under Council rule. Historians across 100 worlds called it the 17-minute war. Those scholars often argued that it was not truly a war at all, since not a single life had been lost in the action itself. Ambassador Rixilov, the former Sathini Dominion, stood on a balcony overlooking the new Galactic Forum, watching delegates from dozens of species walk together through gardens that had been designed by human artists working alongside alien botanists. Her obsidian skin had developed new patterns over the years, marks that her people said showed wisdom earned through hardship and transformation. "You seem thoughtful today," said a voice from behind her, and she turned to see Sarah Chun approaching with a warm smile on her young face. Sarah was one of the new breed of human diplomats who had grown up in the decade after the war, trained from childhood to build bridges between species that had been enemies for millennia. "I am remembering," Rixal replied with a musical sigh that made the air shimmer with faint harmonics. "Remembering who I was before your people taught us how wrong we had been about everything." The young human woman came to stand beside her at the railing, looking out at the same scene with very different eyes. "My grandmother was on one of the ships that took the Citadel," Sarah said while watching a group of Marvani children playing a game with human students in the courtyard below. "She told me stories about that day that I will never forget." "Did she tell you how terrified we all were?" Rexiblo asked with a sound that might have been laughter or tears or both mixed together. The mighty council members who had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, reduced to weeping on the floor by a frequency that lasted 17 seconds. Sarah nodded with sympathy touching her features as she considered the weight of that memory. She said, "The hardest part was not firing." The young diplomat answered thoughtfully. Every soldier had trained to destroy threats, but General Tanaka insisted that true strength meant choosing not to kill even when killing would be easier. Rixal turned to face the human woman with curiosity, burning in her glowing eyes like twin suns seeking answers to ancient questions. "That is what I have never understood about your species," she admitted, while her hands gestured in patterns of genuine confusion. "You had every reason to hate us for what we tried to do to your world. Yet you showed mercy that none of us deserved." Sarah was quiet for a moment as she gathered her thoughts, watching a Crethany delegate help a Volanti child retrieve a ball that had rolled away. "Can I tell you a story about Earth?" she finally asked with a gentleness that reminded Rixal why humans had proven so effective at building peace. Sathini Ambassador nodded and gave the human her full attention. "For most of our history, we were alone on our world with no one to fight but each other. Sarah began while her eyes grew distant with remembered lessons. We had wars that killed millions, weapons that could destroy cities in an instant, hatred that burned between nations for centuries. We know this, Rixal said with confusion coloring her voice. Your violent history was one of the reasons the Council feared you so much. But what you did not understand, Sarah continued with intensity entering her words, was that we also learned from those wars, really learned in ways that changed who we are as a species. She turned to face the alien ambassador with passion shining in her eyes. We discovered that revenge creates cycles of violence that never end. She explained while her hands moved to emphasize her points. We learned that enemies can become friends if someone is brave enough to offer forgiveness first. When we finally reached the stars and found we were not alone, we made a choice as a species, Sarah said with pride evident in every word. We decided that we would not become the monsters we had always imagined were waiting in the darkness. Rixil felt something shift inside her as she listened. Pieces of understanding falling into place that had eluded her for 10 years. You could have been conquerors, she said slowly while working through the implications. You had the power to dominate every species in the galaxy, yet you chose to be liberators instead. Sarah smiled with warmth that seemed to make the air around her brighter. We chose to be neighbors, she corrected gently. Partners and friends and fellow travelers on a journey through the cosmos. That is too vast and wonderful for any single species to explore alone. The Symphony ambassador looked out at the forum again with new eyes. Seeing for the first time the true magnitude of what humanity had accomplished at Morvine, engineers worked alongside human scientists on projects that would have been impossible under Council restrictions. Their combined brilliance creating technologies that benefited every species equally Valanti warriors who had once boasted of their strength, now trained with human martial artists, learning philosophies of peace that made their ancient combat traditions more meaningful than simple Violensikrathani energy. Beings shared their knowledge of dimensional physics with human researchers, unlocking secrets of the universe that had been hidden for millennia. We feared you, Rixal admitted while tears that glowed like liquid starlight rolled down her obsidian cheeks. We looked at humanity and saw only threat and chaos and destruction. What do you see now? Sarah asked with genuine curiosity in her voice. The Scythian ambassador considered the question carefully before answering, wanting to find words that would carry the weight of everything she had learned. I see hope, she finally said with wonder filling her musical voice. I see a species that suffered and struggled and fought its way up from nothing, only to reach out to the stars with open hands instead of closed fists. Sarah reached out and took the alien ambassador's hand in her own, a gesture of connection that would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. That is all we ever wanted, she said with simple honesty. To be seen for who we really are, not what others assumed we must be. Below them in the forum courtyard, children from a dozen species played together without fear or hatred, their laughter rising toward the stars like a promise of better things to come on Earth. Statues had been built to honor General Tanaka and the soldiers who had won the 17-minute war. But the inscriptions did not celebrate conquest or domination instead. They carried words that every human child learned before they could walk. We are here. We mean you no harm, but we will not be threatened. And across the galaxy, species that had once cowered in fear of the mighty council now looked to the stars with excitement, instead of dread, because somewhere out there, humanity was waiting to meet them, not as masters or servants, but as friends. The new dawn had truly begun.